Hey everybody, Congressman Mark Green. It's Whiteboard Wednesday, and we're going to talk about Mayorkas' dereliction of duty because it's been off the charts. Let's first look at the laws that are broken. Now, there are a total of about 10 different laws that basically the Secretary has just chosen not to execute. As Congress, both parties, wrote these laws, and he's either ignored them or broken them. There's a requirement that ICE detain people when they come in seeking asylum, and they have to be detained by law until that process is completed. Mayorkas is just releasing people. ICE deportations, he's basically told, these are people that the courts have ruled their asylum claims as not true asylum. They don't have a justification to be here. The court ruled on it, and he's refused to deport the people. That's against the law. Statutes against mass parole. The laws, the Immigration Naturalization Act, very clear on this. You essentially, it has to be case by case. Asylum granting automatic parole is case by case. He's created programs to make it just whoever comes in. CBP app being one of those, where you just make an appointment ahead of time and you don't even go through a judicial process, which is actually against the law. His interim final rules, another example of breaking the law, where they did away with, and it says in the law, the judiciary shall be the final stage in determining someone's asylum claims. They just basically removed judiciary's role in the process, which is crazy. It's a violation of the law. And of course, that's skipping the immigration piece. Well, they also canceled a lot of policies that were working. The reason is they just want mass waves of people coming into the country. But of course, remain in Mexico. If you're fleeing persecution in one country and you go into another country, you should have gotten out of the threat, right? That just makes sense. So why come all the way to the United States? Well, it's not a legitimate asylum claim if you do that. So making them remain in Mexico for that processing makes sense. It's the right thing to do. It's also following the law. Migrant protection protocols, which remain in Mexico, was one of. There are other examples of those. The cooperative agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador all were undone. Sector chiefs have told me on our border there aren't agreements to send people back home if they wanted to. Of course, we know he ended wall construction. There's study after study that show that walls work. And the Democrats who push back on this, why do they lock their doors at home? Look, you have a wall and it works. It canalizes people. The military uses those too. Title 42 basically ended that policy, and during its implementation did a very poor job of actually executing it before they ended it. So that was sort of non-compliance, even though it still existed. They did away with DNA tests of family units to prove that, and we know for a fact the cartels are grabbing kids, bringing them to get across the border, dropping the children. You've seen images of that on television for at least those bold reporters willing to talk about it. And this is probably the one that just pisses me off the most, and it ought to anger every American. They did away with background checks on the sponsors for unaccompanied children. And the New York Times, not known to be a conservative biased media outlet, found families where the sponsor had 20 or 30 of these kids and they were doing basically slave labor. It's unconscionable, and you can only imagine what else these children are being forced to do. 85,000 of them lost by the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services just because they stopped doing the background checks on the individual sponsors. Crazy. Why would they do that? Well, of course, they don't want any barrier to speeding people into the country. That's their dereliction of duty, is failure to follow laws, getting rid of policies that actually work. That's Whiteboard Wednesday.